She's joining us from Hamburg. Also with us is political analyst WION. Mr. Awad, if I can come to you first, how big is this development in your opinion, the fact that the US and Russia have managed to broker a ceasefire deal?
Well, I think there is an understanding in the G20 that there has to be a comprehensive fight against terrorism. If the international community is serious about fighting terrorism, they have to reach a sort of an agreement inside Syria where they have to de-escalate in areas where there is no terrorist organization. Maybe there are some rebels, some opposition, where they can come in terms with the Syrian government and find a reconciliation solution. So the fight has to be concentrated on Daesh, IS, and al-Nusra, which is affiliated to Al-Qaeda. And there has been 6 areas of de-escalation agreement have reached with the Russian and the Turkey and Iran and the Syrian government some time ago, and the Russians were also trying to implement it. So if there is any breakthrough between the Trump and Putin meeting for the first time in the G20 summit, then there's a good sign that we may see a de-escalation of this area, and that could be spread to other parts of Syria if that is really going to have an effect, and really there will be an international willing that these people who are supporting those militants on the ground can lean on them and say to have a ceasefire and let's reach to a political solution.
Right. Stay with me, Mr. Awad. Let me go across to Padma as well. Padma, there's been so much build-up to this meeting between the presidents Trump and Putin, and the outcome as it stands right now in this new development as far as Syria goes, it seems like the meeting has lived up to its billing. Would it be safe to say that?
Well, I'm currently looking at the billing. In Germany, Aisha, and the billing in Germany has been far from optimistic and far from kind to either of the two leaders. They're looking at this meeting. We've been speaking to people here all day. Many of these people who have been trying to demonstrate, except that they've been held back by the police. They're talking about, they're using a German word, Scheinheiligkeit, which is a holier than thou attitude. They're also using the word Augenwäsche, which is eye wash. These are pretty much the attitudes here. They feel, and I think I reflect my remarks would reflect pretty much what WION has just said. It's all very well for the United States and Russia to declare an agreement of sorts in Syria. But let's not forget, Aisha, history has taught us many, many lessons. These two countries have very, very often, also in other parts of the world, first supported certain groups, then turned against those groups, and then finally turned against each other, with each one supporting the opposite side's groups. This has happened time and again. So when, one can only hope that there is peace in Syria. One can only hope that, the optimism that is prevailing in certain sections is real. But I can only speak from history. Even if the two countries mean it seriously, how are the fighters, the thousands of fighters that they have nurtured, that they have weaponized, and that they have torn asunder over kids, how are they going to react to this suddenly being let down by what they see, the country they see as their mentor, respectively? What is going to happen on the ground if the two big powers who are involved, decide we're going to shake hands? What about the thousands of lives who were lost, including those of the fighters who fought in the name not only of their own war, but also against the US-led war against terror? So there is a lot of confusion and muddle on the ground, which has been created primarily by these two superpowers. And for them to now come together and say, one can hope they're not lying. But I fear that history has taught us other lessons. So I would take a more guarded approach and wait and watch to see what happens after the 9th of July.
All right. WION, would you agree with Padma that words are one thing, but when it comes down to actual action on the ground, it's an entirely different situation, and perhaps too much is being given to the US and Russia, who have been involved in this peace-building process, if you will, but questions haven't been asked, or tough questions at least, about involvement to start with, which has led to the mess that is existing in Syria right now.
Well, I echo what Padma have been saying. Actually, I would like to add here that the United States does not want neither the Russian nor the Iranian nor the Syrian government to emerge the only sole winner in the Syrian war. They're looking for an exit, a diplomatic exit formula out of the Syrian crisis, because as you know, the Americans have established illegally 7 military bases in Syria. Now they have more than 1,400 Marines on the ground. So if the United States will continue this policy retaliation and provoking the Syrian government, it might be inviting trouble for their illegal presence in Syria. So any kind of an agreement with Russia at this stage at least will ensure the safety of American soldiers, and maybe later on, if the American putting pressure on the Russian and on the Syrian government to legalize these military bases in Syria. But having said that, I wouldn't think that the Syrian government will ever go and accept the American presence in Syria as long as the American does not come in the open and stops supporting with its allies the terrorists on the ground. But we can see the ramification and the fallout of the crisis between Saudi Arabia and Qatar have really exposed those countries supporting terrorist groups on the ground. So now they are pulling their hands out of these groups. We can see interfighting among the terrorist group. And we have seen that the Americans are now feeling the heat that there is no question of regime change in Syria by force, because they have failed, and therefore they have to reach to some kind of reconciliation with the Russian and to end at least the bloodshed for the moment, because everybody knows and the international community knows that there is no seriousness among the American in fighting terrorists. In fact, even Raqqa is going to fall like Mosul fell in the hands of the Iraqi. So it's a matter of days before this Raqqa also be liberated from the terrorist organization.
All right, Ramesh, you've been listening into all of these points being made by Padma and WION. Are we forgetting Syria's own demands, own requirements at this point in time by squarely focusing attention on the two big players, if you will, in the US and Russia, and the allies which we're given to believe are Lebanon and Jordan? What do you make of this situation, given your experience with the President Bashar al-Assad in that interview that you conducted recently?
Aisha, the fact remains that the UN of all agencies has called this the worst humanitarian crisis of our time, and the irony is evident, Aisha. The fact that this is the same president who not so long ago had advised the then President Obama not to enter Syria, not to wage a war in Syria, not to go in for a regime change, as Dr. Awad said there, and yet we see that he has finally agreed to a ceasefire with Russia, and for all practical purposes, this may have come too late in the day, given the number of civilian casualties one has seen happen on the ground in Syria and the region at large. But that said, the challenge is to actually implement the ceasefire on the ground starting Sunday, the 9th of July. It remains to be seen how the US and the Russian forces can coordinate the actions on the ground specifically so that the ceasefire can take effect going forward. And that, to my mind, remains a challenge. The fact that they've agreed is half the job done. The real challenge starts now.
Padma, we've been talking about the number of protests taking place in Germany, and you very squarely put forward the German point of view as far as this situation goes. You use the words eyewash, you use the term or the phrase holier than thou. Hamburg's already been taken over by protesters who've been raising their voice against a variety of issues, from protectionism to immigration issues and of course climate change. Do you think this is also going to form part of the ferment, if you will, taking place in Hamburg, that this is again the high-handed attitude of countries that get involved where they shouldn't, and then try to clean up the mess and take the accolades for that as well?
Oh, certainly. This has been criticized in Germany for years. I mean, even the Afghanistan action has been criticized in Germany. And this is the reason why successive governments in Germany always manage to, to find a section of disgruntled supporters who started out perhaps as supporters of a given government, but then quickly turned disgruntled when they realize that there are certain basics, for instance, Germany's logistical support in Afghanistan. There are many issues where they feel their country, A, their country should not get involved, and B, certainly that the United States and Russia have been playing these massive games. Now, to come back to this so-called agreement between President Putin and Trump, the question remains that what is going to happen, since you raised President Assad and also President Rouhani of Iran. What happens to these two men who have traditionally been seen as villains by the United States? I mean, after all, they are also involved in the Syria game, and they're involved in the Syria game as allies of the United States. So does this handshake mean, does this agreement mean that their relationship with the United States is going to change? Is President Trump likely to also shake their hand, give them them a bear hug, a fist bump. I mean, you know, I don't see that coming. I really don't see that coming so fast. So I see strategy, you know, despite an agreement, neither the United States nor Russia will let go the opportunity of pursuing a parallel, quiet strategy of their own, to guard their own interests, never mind what they say under the, you know, when they're under the sort of in the limelight and in the spotlight as they are right now at this very prominent and important summit in Hamburg.
All right. Can you give our viewers an idea of how complicated the situation is as it stands when it comes to Syria?
Well, it is quite complicated. In fact, why? Because nobody is actually interested in have a ceasefire in Syria, because they don't want Syria to retain its own territories. But if you look recently at the President Assad moving around from one city to another city, moving into the field and meeting people of the martyrs, it shows clearly that the war in Syria is weathering out, and there is no question that it's just a matter of time. Now, there is a strong determination by the Russian, by the Iranian, by the Syrian government, and the Iraqi public also, and people, and the war is on in both the sides, and there is an end to this project, which is called the IS, and has to be end from Syria and Iraq. Therefore, I think there is a very much eagerness among the people of this region that we should now have a little bit of peace, because we can see in Aleppo there are some kind of agreement between factions with the Syrian government. They are giving territories. The Kurd also is coming forward. Daesh is fleeing the area. And there are people returning home. And these are the signs where even the UNESCO and the UN agencies have acknowledged that there are more than 100,000 people have returned to Syria ever since the Aleppo was liberated. So if these are the indications, then I think that will bring a little relief for the Syrian people to come back and start rebuilding their own nation. But I am still pessimistic in terms of the future of Syria, because look at the Israelis. They're putting pressure on the American and on the Russian. They wanted to create some free zone, buffer zone inside Syria in the south, next to Golan, where there is oil and gas discovered in the occupied Golan by Israel. But it is extended to some part of the current Syria. So if that is the tendency, then I think the interest of the big game played by the big power will remain a matter of concern, because as long as it is there following their own interest, I don't think they have any respect for the collateral damage of the Syrian people.
Ramesh Ramachandran, do you find Wael Awad's pessimism well-founded?
Aisha, the irony is not lost on anyone, Aisha. The fact remains that this decision to broker a ceasefire between US and Russia comes barely 3 months, remember, Aisha, 3 months after the excuse that the US cited to conduct airstrikes on Syria. Remember, on the 4th of April, the US cited a chemical attack that happened in Khan Sheikhoun area in Idlib province of Syria. And 3 days later, on the 7th of April, the Americans conducted 59 Tomahawk cruise missile strikes on Syria. And that was seen widely as an excuse to escalate tensions inside Syria. And that is what President Assad also told WION in the interview, that one, he does not consider Trump different from the American deep state. It remains to be seen whether Trump can break free from the so-called American deep state and work towards de-escalating tensions inside Syria, number one. Number two, he also maintained that a lot of the regional players, including but not limited to Saudi Arabia, should be held responsible for allowing the situation to come to such a pass. So clearly, in hindsight, Aisha, President Assad seemed to have played his cards well. It remains to be seen, Aisha, the fact whether the ceasefire will actually hold in the days ahead. Remember, there have been several attempts at similar ceasefires between US and Russia inside Syria, and those have failed within days of it being announced. So this occasion, let's see, we have to wait and watch as to how the ceasefire will hold on the ground, and whether the two sides can come to some understanding or modus vivendi on the way forward insofar as Syria is concerned.
All right, stay with me, Padma Rao, Wael Awad and Ramesh Ramachandran. Just a quick reminder for our viewers, live visuals coming in from Hamburg. This is a cultural evening being held in the city, in the German city where the G20 summit is underway. Padma, these pretty pictures aside, I want to ask you, as Ramesh was saying, it's probably a fairly long shot in itself that President Trump will be able to extricate himself from the deep state or the policies of the United States in the past, or is he erratic and unpredictable enough to sort of break free from established protocol and rules and regulations?
Well, it's only been 6 months, Aisha, or barely 7 months since he came to power. And yes, he has been erratic on many fronts, but he's also, turned around a few things which had been heavily criticized under President Obama. So that we'll have to wait and watch as to how it plays out. What I'm more concerned about is, and I just wanted to point out that it's not just President Trump and President Putin's so-called agreement that is under scrutiny here. It's overall the G20. For instance, the statement they issued on countering terrorism. All these nations, almost all these nations have faced terrorism, and almost all these nations are supporting anti-terrorism operations in many parts of the world. But the point is that, there have been lapses. They're talking about, improving communication, improving security. They're talking about things like tightening borders, more border surveillance. But that is in direct contradiction to many of their domestic policies. For instance, Germany is very Eurocentric. It wants to keep its open borders. This is one of the things the German citizens tell me all the time. The reason why they don't want to give up the European Union is because of the open borders. But the thing is, it's these very open borders that have on several occasions in the last few years caused tragic incidents, a failure of intelligence sometimes from across the Atlantic. So it's all very well to stand on a global stage and sign 20-point agreements and give declarations about how to fight terrorism. Now, India, let's not forget, a very last point, is also at this conference and is perhaps a peripheral but an extremely important member. How much have these countries done, the main G20 countries, to counter, to keep, to stick to what they're declaring today about people like Hafiz Saeed, people like the Lashkar-e-Jahangir, people like Jaish-e-Mohammed? What have they done? I mean, they're talking about, not allowing states to support terrorism. They're talking about not allowing states to offer refuge to terrorism, but they've done so themselves. They're talking about not allowing, terrorists to come and live in other countries. They've done that in the past themselves under the guise of freedom fighting in other countries. They've done that in Sri Lanka. They've done that in many countries. So, and I need to point out, I mean, where was the greatest terrorist of them all found? In the mother lode of terrorism, Pakistan. Has that stopped any of these countries? Has that inspired any of these countries to taking greater action against Pakistan? No, it hasn't, because what prevails? Strategic interest, bilateral interests. That's what prevails. I'm sorry to be an old cynic. I'd like to be as cheerful as the sunshine here in Hamburg today. But I'm afraid this is a party. This is a jamboree, a very expensive jamboree. And as you rightly mentioned, it is now going into the Elbphilharmonica, which is a beautiful concert hall. And the leaders are all gathered there in their finery. And, it makes a beautiful photo opportunity. And it's a great showcase for the city of Hamburg, which, as you rightly point out, is simply stunning. But the fact remains that nobody here this summit is not pulling the wool over anybody's eyes in this city. It may look beautiful and peaceful, but they're all very thinking, very sharp, and it is the most left-wing city in Germany.
Your point's well taken, Padma, and I thank you for bringing us back to the whole catchphrase of terror, because in talking of this new ceasefire deal between the US, Russia and other allies, one seems to have forgotten that terror has come up already repeatedly during today's conversations. In fact, none other than India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi reminding the world that it has failed, so to speak, in its response to terror, that it's been weak in its response. While Awad, taking all of what Padma just brought to us from Hamburg, I know that you've already spoken of your skepticism overall to this ceasefire deal, but just for the sake of understanding it from the point of view of South Asia, where we're situated, isn't Pakistan an example enough of how the United States has repeatedly ignored many requests from India? China itself has blocked so many attempts by India in making or in establishing Masood Azhar as a global terrorist, and it just goes to show that there's a tremendous amount of doublespeak when it comes to what qualifies for certain people as terror and what doesn't.
Absolutely. We are still at the international community have failed to address even the definition of terror, because what is known as for you as a terrorist act, it is for them a resistance or a revolutionary act is carried out for liberation, which is it's contradicting what exactly Mr. Modi or India has presented the UN long time ago, a draft for the comprehensive fight against terrorism, which nobody till date address it. There where the contradiction comes. Selectivity in fighting terrorism makes it impossible to fight it. No one can fight terrorism on its own. You cannot find terrorists when they are only affecting your own country. Terrorists, they have no boundaries. They have no countries to leave. They have no difference from any country. There is no moderate or hard terrorist. Terrorist is a terrorist. Once you start dealing with them equally at equal ground anywhere in the world, then you are able to fight. If you wanted to go selectivity and saying that A group is a terrorist and B group is a freedom fighter, then we are at receiving end. We should not allow this to continue for long, because at the end of the day, it is your country or my country who has to go and fight terrorism. But if we wanted to eradicate terrorism, we have to fight it collectively. And that is the responsibility of the international community, really to come forward and fight it. Otherwise, we are just fooling ourselves and we are just continue, because terrorism become a tool used by certain government also as a way of invading country under the humanitarian intervention. We know whose hand is with terrorist group. If we start pointing out, I think public global opinion has been changing, because people have been seeing those mercenaries who have gone to Syria, gone to Iraq, have gone back their home, a native country, and start creating the havoc in their countries. Now they're saying, why you allow them to go and why you allow them to come? Therefore, there has to be a linkage and expose this linkage between the state government run policy and the public who is receiving it, paying the price for the wrongdoing of their own government.
Absolutely. Well said, Awad. Stay with us. I've got time for one last question. I'll take that across to my colleague, Ramesh Ramachandran. He's been patiently holding on this conversation with us. Ramesh, just to sort of close this segment, I just want to ask you, you know, the United States has been overall concerned as far as Iran's growing influence goes when it comes to the Syrian conflict. How do you think this new deal will impact the scenario, keeping that in mind?
Sure, certain points do come out very starkly. One, the U.S., for instance, had no business to be in Syria in the first place. Unlike Russia, which was there at the invitation of the Syrian government, the U.S. is waging an illegal war. That is the bitter truth, number one. Number two, the U.S. policy, the extant policy of regime change, preemptive strikes, and humanitarian intervention have all been challenged and they've been exposed in the instant case. And to my mind, it exposes the limits of American influence in West Asia and the region at large. And number three, Aisha, the bitter truth again is that it remains to be seen how this might play on the ground insofar as the changing geopolitical situation in West Asia is concerned, given the emergence or the re-emergence of Russia and Iran in the West Asian dynamic, and how the Americans might choose to navigate from here onwards.
All right. Thanks, Ramesh, for wrapping that up for us so succinctly. We'll leave it at that. Thanks, everyone. Padma Rao, Awad, and Ramesh Ramachandran, all of you for joining in on the broadcast and bringing your different perspectives to the table to help us sort of understand the significance of this ceasefire deal, but from all perspectives, or not just one side of the story, but really looking at the entire story in a holistic way. It's not as hunky-dory as it appears, as the images might suggest.